There are names that once lived quietly in driveways and family photo albums. Names that didn't shout for attention, but showed up every morning without fail. They carried groceries, children, and memories, and then, one day, they were simply gone. No ceremony. No goodbye. Just absence. Oldsmobile was one of those names. For generations, it wasn't just a car brand. It was part of how America moved, and now, it exists mostly in silence. The question isn't just how Oldsmobile disappeared. It's how something so deeply woven into everyday life could fade so completely. Oldsmobile began with a kind of optimism that feels almost impossible to recreate today. At the turn of the 20th century, cars weren't yet symbols of freedom. They were curiosities, fragile, unreliable, and expensive. Ransomy Olds believed they could be something else entirely. He didn't set out to build toys for the wealthy. He wanted to build machines for ordinary people. Simple, repeatable, trustworthy. That idea alone was risky. At a time when most cars were handmade in tiny numbers, Olds imagined building many of the same car, over and over again, so people could afford them and rely on them. The curved dash Oldsmobile didn't just sell well, it changed expectations. It showed Americans that automobiles could be practical, not just experimental. Families who had never imagined owning a car suddenly could. Farmers used them, shopkeepers used them. They weren't glamorous, but they worked. In many ways, Oldsmobile helped normalize the automobile itself. Before highways, before suburbs, before car culture had a name, Oldsmobile was already there, quietly proving that the future could be dependable. As the decades moved forward, Oldsmobile grew alongside the country. When America expanded outward, Oldsmobile followed. When families grew larger, so did the cars. When the middle class found its footing, Oldsmobile became one of its most familiar companions. This was not a brand built on rebellion or excess. It was built on reassurance. The cars felt solid. The doors closed with weight. The interiors were comfortable without being flashy. You didn't buy an Oldsmobile to impress strangers. You bought one because it felt like the right decision. Innovation was always part of that story, even if it wasn't always loud about it. Oldsmobile didn't just follow trends. Often, it created them. The fully automatic transmission, something we now take for granted, reached the public through Oldsmobile. For drivers at the time, this wasn't a technical marvel. It was a relief. No more constant shifting. No more fatigue in traffic. Driving became smoother, calmer, and more accessible. Oldsmobile didn't sell it as a revolution. It sold it as progress that made life easier. That pattern repeated itself again and again. New ideas arrived in Oldsmobile showrooms quietly, without spectacle. More powerful engines that didn't feel intimidating. Interiors that felt thought through, instead of overstyled. Features that made long drives less tiring. For many Americans, their first experience with modern driving came through an Oldsmobile without them ever realizing it. The brand didn't demand credit. It just worked. Culturally, Oldsmobile became a marker of arrival. Not arrival in the sense of wealth, but of stability. The car in the driveway that said things were going okay. That the mortgage was paid. That the kids were growing. That life had found a rhythm. Oldsmobiles appeared in family vacations, in graduations, in weddings. They were there when parents taught their children how to drive. They were there in small towns and growing suburbs, becoming part of the background of American life. Advertising reflected that tone. Oldsmobile didn't sell fantasies, it sold confidence. The message wasn't that you could be someone else. It was that you were already doing well, and this car fit that life. Over time, slogans came and went, but the underlying promise stayed the same. This was a brand you could trust, and trust, once earned, runs deep. There were moments when Oldsmobile reached beyond that comfort and touched something bolder. Performance cars emerged that proved the company understood excitement as well as restraint. Muscle arrived without abandoning manners. Power was there, but it was controlled. For drivers, this balance mattered. You could feel capable without feeling reckless. Again, Oldsmobile wasn't chasing extremes, it was refining them, but somewhere along the way, that clarity began to blur. The industry around Oldsmobile changed faster than its identity could keep up. Competition intensified, styling became louder. Brands were pushed to define themselves more sharply. Inside a growing corporate structure, Oldsmobile found itself pulled in different directions. It was asked to be innovative, but not too different. Premium, but not too expensive. Sporty, but still safe. Over time, those compromises added up. Cars began to feel less distinct. To loyal customers, the difference between one brand and another grew harder to explain. Oldsmobile models shared more with their corporate siblings than with their own past. The quiet confidence that once defined the brand started to feel muted, even unsure. Customers who had trusted Oldsmobile for decades began to hesitate, not because the cars were bad, but because they no longer felt uniquely right. They were warnings, though they were subtle. Sales softened. Younger buyers looked elsewhere. Longtime owners noticed changes they couldn't quite articulate. The cars still worked. They were still comfortable, but something intangible was missing, the sense that this brand understood exactly who it was building for. Trust, once shaken, doesn't break loudly, it erodes slowly. Internally, pressure mounted. Decisions were influenced by spreadsheets and strategy meetings rather than instinct and heritage. Oldsmobile was asked to reinvent itself without fully acknowledging what it had been. New directions were announced. New promises were made. But reinvention is difficult when the audience you built your reputation on no longer recognizes you, and the audience you want doesn't yet believe you. The emotional weight of that shift can't be overstated. For many buyers, Oldsmobile wasn't just a choice. It was tradition. Fathers bought what their fathers had driven. When that continuity breaks, it feels personal, not angry, just sad. A quiet disappointment that something familiar no longer feels like home. As the end approached, it didn't arrive with scandal or collapse. It arrived with announcements, timelines, and careful language. Production wound down. Dealerships adjusted. Final cars were built not in desperation, but in calm acceptance. When the last Oldsmobile rolled off the line, there was no dramatic moment. Just the end of a very long conversation between a brand and the people who had trusted it. Looking back now, it's tempting to reduce Oldsmobile's story to mistakes or missed opportunities. But that misses the larger truth. Oldsmobile didn't fail because it lacked innovation. It often had too much of it, introduced too gently in a world that was learning to shout. It didn't fail because it ignored drivers. It failed because the industry around it changed what drivers were taught to value. Many of the ideas Oldsmobile helped normalize are everywhere today. Smooth automatics, comfortable power, cars designed to reduce stress instead of amplify excitement. These things didn't disappear when the brand did. They became standard. In that sense, Oldsmobile succeeded completely. It just didn't survive long enough to be remembered for it. There's a quiet irony in that. A company that helped shape modern driving couldn't find a place in the modern market. A brand that once defined progress became invisible once progress became expected. Oldsmobile built the future, and then watched it move on without looking back. If you listen closely, though, it hasn't fully vanished. It's there in the way cars feel when they prioritize ease over spectacle. It's there in the assumption that technology should serve the driver, not overwhelm them. It's there in memories shared by people who still remember the feel of an Oldsmobile steering wheel, the sound of the engine, the sense that everything was going to be fine. Oldsmobile didn't leave behind a dramatic ending. It left behind a legacy woven so deeply into everyday life that we stopped noticing it. Maybe that was always its role. To be present without demanding attention. To matter without making noise. So, the question isn't just why Oldsmobile vanished. It's whether we still recognize the values it stood for. And whether, In a world that moves faster and louder every year, there's still room for something built on quiet confidence. If you remember Oldsmobile, or if its story made you think of a car that once meant something to you, feel free to share that memory. Preserving these stories is one way they stay alive. And if you'd like to hear more histories like this, told slowly and with care, you know where to find them.